All right, let's dive into a question that might just flip what you know about world history on its head. We're going on a hunt for the world's very first republic.
So, if I were to ask you, where did democracy really begin? What's the first place that pops into your mind? For most of us, there's that one classic answer we all learned in school.
Yep, you're probably thinking of ancient Athens, right? Around 500 BCE. It's famous as the cradle of democracy, where the whole idea of rule by the people supposedly took off. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? What if the real experiment began somewhere else entirely, and much, much earlier? To find the answer, we're not heading to the Mediterranean. Nope, we're traveling to the plains of ancient India, to a powerful city-state called Vaishali. Because it's right here that we find this incredible, and much earlier, experiment in self-government.
And just look at this date. We are talking about the 6th century BCE. That is a full 100 years before the famous democratic reforms ever happened in Athens. This isn't just some minor little detail. This could literally shift the entire timeline of political innovation.
The system they came up with was known as a Gana Sangha. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, essentially, it was a self-governing organization made up of different clans, a collective that ruled together. It's pretty much the closest ancient equivalent to what we'd call a republic or an assembly today.
So what was this place actually like? Well, Vaishali wasn't some tiny village. No way. This was the capital of the powerful Vajji Confederacy, which was a big alliance of 8 different clans. The ones leading the charge were the Licchavis, and they're the ones who pushed this revolutionary move away from being ruled by one king to this new system of collective government. And we know a surprising amount about it because it's mentioned all the time in major Buddhist and Jain texts from that period.
So the million-dollar question is, how did it work? Well, it was actually amazingly organized. First, the leaders from the different clans would all meet in an assembly called the Gana. In there, they'd openly debate all the big issues facing the state. Decisions weren't just handed down by one guy. They were made by voting, trying to get everyone to agree or at least get a majority. And here's the really clever part. To stop any one person from grabbing too much power, the top executive jobs were rotated among the noble families. Pretty smart, huh?
It sounds pretty advanced for its time, doesn't it? But how does it really stack up against that Athenian model we're all so familiar with? Well, let's put them side by side and see.
What's so fascinating here is you can see the similarities, but also the huge differences. Both had an assembly for making decisions, which is a big deal. But here's the main distinction. In Vaishali, you had to be part of the nobility, a clan leader, to get in. That makes it more of an oligarchic republic. In Athens, it was open to all free male citizens, which is why we call it the first participatory democracy. So 2 different approaches to a similar groundbreaking idea.
Okay, so you might be thinking, this is cool, but how do we actually know all this? The evidence is pretty strong, and it comes from a few different places. We have texts like the Buddhist Pali Canon that describe the assembly in detail. We've got archaeological proof from digs that have uncovered this sophisticated, fortified city. And we even have historical art, like the carvings on the ancient Sanchi stupa, which appear to show this exact form of republican government in action.
Now, we have to keep things in perspective here. On the one hand, the idea of being ruled by an elected assembly, instead of just a king who inherited the throne, that was absolutely revolutionary for its time. But the reality was, well, limited. Just like in Athens, huge chunks of the population, we're talking women and people in the lower classes, were totally left out of the process. So while it was a giant leap forward, it wasn't a universal democracy as we think of it today.
So what happened to this pioneering republic? Well, like so many great powers in ancient history, its end came from the outside. Around 468 BCE, the rival kingdom of Magadha, led by an ambitious king named Ajatashatru, invaded and conquered Vaishali, and that was the end of its unique government. Over time, the city was just absorbed into the bigger empire, and its prominence began to fade.
But its political end wasn't the end of its story, not by a long shot. Vaishali's legacy lived on in some really powerful ways. Its model of collective decision-making actually inspired the democratic structure of Buddhist monasteries. It remained a super important spiritual center, it hosted the Buddha's final sermon, and was the birthplace of Mahavira, the founder of Jainism. It's just incredible proof of ancient India's amazing ingenuity when it came to political ideas. And that legacy still echoes today. This quote from Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi connects Vaishali's ancient history to a modern sense of national identity.
It frames democracy not as some idea imported from elsewhere, but as something with deep, ancient roots in India's own past. It really highlights why this story matters so much, even now.
So, the story of Vaishali shows us that the history of how we govern ourselves is so much richer and more complicated than we usually think. It kind of pushes us to ask, if a story this important can be overlooked for so long, what other histories have we forgotten? What other pioneers are just waiting to be rediscovered?
The people of Vaishali believed that the power of a collective voice could shape their world. And in that same spirit, your voice matters right here. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us uncover more of these incredible hidden histories for everyone.